As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep. Put pucks in deep.
We had to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
Rookie camps are underway. The San Jose Sharks are undefeated in NHL hockey for the 2024-25 season. And the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast is back. And some people celebrate the century mark, the 500 mark, the 1,000 mark. We're here with episode number 10, 3 away from the point that I was told all podcasts either fail or hit their stride. Gentlemen, I think we're in a good spot. Welcoming back George Bannister and Matt Leonardo. I'm Casey Ditzel. George, we'll start with you. How's it been going? Welcome back.
Oh, thanks. It's been busy with the broadcasting stuff, busy with the family stuff, but back in the saddle. It feels good to be with you guys, man.
A stint on the injured reserve last week, back into full health here, and we're glad to have you back.
So happy to be back.
And our other side of the co-hosts, who was here last week, unfortunately for some of our listeners, and say that as jokingly as possible, but a guy who was almost on the IR this week and went from being potentially a game time decision to a healthy scratch to back in the lineup immediately, Matt Leonardo, who's posted up in a hotel room after a long day of work, pumped on caffeine. And Matty, what's going on out there?
Not much. Unlike the Christian McCaffrey owners in the world, I have the big Q next to my name, but we persevere and make it to Monday night. So happy to be back and drop in some, you know what, I'll say it, maybe some hot takes, but definitely some rational takes. We're gonna throw that out there as well. So I think the caffeine and the long day at work just prepped me to really back up the opinions that I'll have on the Central today.
I've got a growing pile of laundry in the corner of my room that continues to be yet to be done. This is much more important. I think instead of spending my time doing laundry, I'm much more invested in building a draft strategy for the upcoming Fifth Liners fantasy hockey draft that we'll be talking about 2 weeks from now. But more importantly, right now, it's the Central Division here. And upcoming guest, the play-by-play announcer of the Nashville Predators, Pete Weber, joining the podcast. Very excited to talk Nashville Predators hockey with him. And going through that, we will talk about the rest of the Central Division, and a division that could be the toughest to win or the toughest to get through in the NHL. We'll talk about all of that coming up, gentlemen, but let's start by taking a look at the standings and going from last year at the top of the division. It was the Dallas Stars who were favorites to get all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. They were eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs, but the number one team in the West last year and poised to do the same thing, lost a few big pieces. Then it was Winnipeg as the number 2 seed. Colorado, the 3 seed in the playoffs. They came into Winnipeg and upset the Jets. The Jets with some coaching turnover that they'll have to deal with. Nashville got in 4th in the conference. Following that, St. Louis, Minnesota, the former Arizona Coyotes, now Utah Hockey Club, and Chicago Blackhawks down at the bottom of the barrel. We'll start with Nashville here as we get ready to welcome Pete into the show. But a few major changes, and by a few, pretty much the entire roster for the Nashville Predators. And a lot of it coming right on the opening of free agency, July 1st, as they pick up Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea, Scott Wedgwood, David Edstrom, Magnus Krona, and Ozzy Weisblatt. Losses for the team. They lose their big goaltending prospect in Yaroslav Askarov. They lose Jason Zucker, Anthony Beauvillier, Ryan McDonough through trade back to Tampa Bay, Kevin Lankinen, and Kiefer Sherwood. Gentlemen, looking at Nashville here, there's a lot of anticipation. This might be up there with the New Jersey Devils for the most anticipated 2024-25 campaign upcoming after the big offseason that they had.
I think it starts with the pining by everybody for Steven Stamkos, and then the surprise by most involved, by most media and fans, that he actually went and signed with Nashville. But here's one area I want everybody to look at, right? Askarov is a big loss. They couldn't guarantee him an NHL spot on the roster, which blew my mind, by the way, because he is an NHL caliber goaltender already. But Kevin Lankinen leaving, and then you mentioned Scott Wedgwood coming in. That's going to be big in the division. We'll talk about that a little later. There's a little big market tease for everybody. We'll talk about that later, but that's one area, Nashville, I feel, me personally, improved the most on, despite losing Askarov.
Yeah, and you look at the roster now and kind of the top heavy approach that Barry Trotz has gone with here. I mean, this top six is one of the scariest in the league by adding two perennial goal scorers in Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. I'm a little concerned about the overall depth of the team. You look at some of the bottom six pieces, and other than Colton Sissons, I think there's a lot of question marks on that bottom six for the forward group. And then defensively, you're going to have somebody step up and with some of the losses that they had to their D-core. Obviously, adding Brady Shea is huge for that top pair. And I think him and Yossi are going to play really well together. But overall, I think depth might be a little bit of a concern for Nashville. But hard to not argue with, one of, if not the best off seasons in the NHL this year for Nashville. They're clearly not going into a rebuild with Barry Trotz taking the helm a couple years back. And they haven't really lost their future as well. 3 first-round picks coming up over the next year or two, I believe. So you look at this team, and not even just for this upcoming season and beyond, but I think Nashville's really set themselves up as an organization to really make some moves in the future for the Central.
I'm extremely high on the Predators upcoming, and the word you mentioned in rebuild there, it was expected that Nashville was going down the tubes, and it was going to be a long time until we saw them back at the spot where they were fighting with the Pittsburgh Penguins for a Stanley Cup championship a few years ago. And all of a sudden, they're right back in contention to potentially being one of the favorites in the Western Conference. And as you mentioned, Brady Shea is such a huge piece. They lose on the defensive side, Ryan McDonough, but you bring Shea in. He's a guy who not only has the offensive upside to be a power play number 2 guy right along with Yossi there, but also on top of being an exceptional puck-moving guy offensively, he is the complete opposite of a defensive liability where they can just about guarantee that he can go in any situation. Where he played alongside Brett Pesce on the Carolina Hurricanes. They were the duo that went out against all of the top dogs on the other teams. They were the guys that ate the minutes defensively. Shea's a huge penalty kill guy. Although he's touted for his power play, he plays big penalty kill minutes as well. So for Nashville, that might be the best ad of the season, and that's going alongside of Steven Stamkos, who's a touted Stanley Cup championship winner, a touted goal scorer, one of the best in the NHL, and Jonathan Marchessault, also a Stanley Cup champion and the number 1 goal scorer on the former Cup champs of the Vegas Golden Knights. So Nashville, for me, it's extremely exciting going into the season. Guys, about to send it over to the interview with Pete. Any last thoughts on Nashville before we go that way?
Yeah, one more. You mentioned Brady Shea. Here's 2 names that I'm going to bring to you, and you already mentioned Ryan McDonough, that New York Rangers fans really despise the departure of. Ryan McDonough on that awful trade, and Brady Shea. And Shea just stepped up and went to Carolina and proved to everybody why the Rangers should have fought to keep him. And even now, Rangers fans, myself included, are still kicking themselves that they never kept him.
And I think Shea brings a really good opportunity to get really creative on that Nashville power play, like you mentioned. If you're the coach there, I don't hate the idea of putting Roman Yossi over on the wing. He's got one of the best shots from the blue line in the league, and Shea is a great distributor up top. Putting, any of those 3 between Marchessault, Forsberg, and Stamkos on that right wing, or on that left wing, sorry, and putting the other one in the bumper. I think this power play can be really creative and really dangerous just based on who has the hot hand.
We'll send it over now to Pete Weber, the voice of the Nashville Predators, excuse me. And very excited to be able to talk shop with him. He joined us. He had 15 minutes amidst a conference appearance that he was at, and was lucky enough for us able to give time. And we'll send it over there now and be back afterwards. Next guest is a personal favorite of mine, and one that I've been waiting to welcome on, and a perfect time to do it as we're looking over the Central Division and his team that was the loudest on free agency day. Pleased to welcome the play-by-play voice of the Nashville Predators and my friend Pete Weber. Pete, how's it going down there getting ready for the season?
Casey, it's going very, very well. We're having the rookie showcases coming up now. I think only 30 of the 32 teams are involved this weekend in rookie level tournaments. And the kids just began checking in today. So I'll be very busy with that through Monday.
Nashville was very busy this offseason. We'll start right there and talking about the mentality of bringing in winning players. And they did just that. On July 1st, it started with Marchessault and Stamkos. Then they add Brady Shea. All three of those guys big-time offensive threats, and obviously with Jonathan Marchessault and Steven Stamkos, proven winners that both have Stanley Cups. Shea, a guy who adds to the defensive blue line, an offensive puck mover that goes right alongside Roman Josi, the ability to run a power play. He'll be great for power play number 2 to bolster the offense there. From inside the organization, going into this offseason, did you see this huge July 1st coming at all? There was talks about a retool and rebuild. They did the complete opposite of that. And also with those players coming in, what is going to be the impact for the upcoming season?
Well, I got to tell you, Casey, for some reason or other, I thought Stamkos would end up with the Predators. Excuse me. But Jonathan Marchessault, that was really a surprise. I knew they were looking for another defenseman. So Brady Shea fits in nicely. I think that probably with the two defensemen defecting, if you will, from Carolina, Brett Pesce, I think that's hurt them somewhat. And then bringing in Scott Wedgwood to back up the goaltender, UC Saros, who was also part of free agent frenzy in that he re-signed a deal for the maximum 8 years just before they got off after Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea and Wedgwood. That was I have to say it was essentially, now the way the timing worked out, and you know that you don't get all the talks done in 5 seconds, but essentially was 1 hour from noon Central Time until 1 o'clock, where the entire face of the franchise was changed drastically.
Forsberg's a guy I want to ask you, and on a personal note, I'm in a keeper fantasy hockey league that he's one of the guys I had drafted very late last year that it was a reason that got me into playoffs there. But these additions around him, he was pretty much the offense on the forward core last year. With those major additions, what is that going to have on his impact to the lineup going forward this year?
I think it's going to probably relax him a little bit because now he knows he doesn't have to be the guy. And Ryan O'Reilly was a great part of that first line too with Gus Nyquist. Now I'm thinking that at least at the start, head coach Andrew Burnett is going to want to maintain that first line, Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist. And then Marchessault and Stamkos. Now, who is going to be their pivot? I would say that Colton Sissons is going to be the backup there, but they have other ideas of doing things with the youth that they have on the team. And then the young kid Kemmel, who had an outstanding season with Milwaukee last year, he's also going to be a factor in trying to get some power play time. So we talk about the power play, right? And does everybody have to gather in the left circle as right-handed shots on the off-wing side? That certainly is something that Stamkos has been great at over the course of his career, and no reason to think there's going to be a change.
That's where I want to go next. And looking at the power play, that's one of the big criticisms, if you can find any from this offseason, is that all three of those guys in Stamkos, Marchessault, and Forsberg are right shots. When you look at potential combinations of this power play, do you see that causing any problems in the effectiveness of that power play that could be so strong? And also, maybe what are some combinations that you predict for this upcoming season?
Well, I'm wondering about Roman Josi will be at the point for the most part, but it probably is going to be a Stamkos and a Forsberg, one or the other either in that left faceoff circle or back at the left point. And I think that will. Can you imagine being the penalty killing guys trying to work the other side with that lineup of guys out in front of you? I can't. And it reminds me a lot of the great Islanders teams of the 80s who had so many different weapons. The Predators, it took, 6 years before they had 200 goals for in a season. And now it looks like they could have that by the end of November.
To answer your question, and if I can imagine penalty killing, you follow me on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen a couple of my my beer league highlights that I post. It's not. It wouldn't be too pretty if I was out there. Barry Trotz.
Well, I hope. Did you happen to see yesterday? Did you see where Roberto Luongo answered a Facebook plea for a beer league goaltender in Florida, and he showed up at the dressing room all dressed up and ready to go last night?
That would be the absolute dream for my team in Rochester. We came in fourth place out of 4 and lost the third place game. So we could have used that pretty well. Maybe we'll have to bring you up, Pete, and suit you up. You'd probably one up any of my skills that I've got.
No, you're going to look for a penalty killing centerman. That's what I would be.
Right. Barry Trotz was another big addition, even though it's not on the ice. He comes in as the general manager before last season, and he's made a few really aggressive moves that have set the Predators up for future success. One of the big stories last year was around right when the team started picking up steam, when he canceled the team's trip to the Vegas Sphere where they were going to the U2 concert allegedly, and canceled that trip after a poor performance at home, making the statement about for the fans, this team is expected to go out every day on home ice and give their best effort for the fans who pay the money to be here. And that was a values and culture.
Yep, a 9-2 loss to the Dallas Stars.
Right. And since he's come in, you've been around the organization since the start. Talk about the values and the culture that Barry Trotz has instilled since arriving in Nashville.
Yeah, and this is a re-arrival because he was the team's coach the first 14 seasons. So he understands the marketplace very well. He understands how the fans value work ethic and going after it in that sense. That Dallas game was such a catastrophe. And yet, what happened to me in the immediate thereafter? They went on an 18-game unbeaten streak. I mean, everybody expected that, obviously. I talked with Ryan McDonough about that, and he goes, we had no idea what was in store for us after that, other than some bag skate practices. And really, the way practices are set up now, there aren't that many bag skates, though there was one. And I think that was where the word was etched into their brains, accountability, after that loss to Dallas.
This summer, you talked about Saros signing. That brought up the most recent news in the star prospect Askarov getting sent out to San Jose, demanding a trade, saying he wouldn't come back. And around UC Saros, he's been the next Pecorine since he took over the crease, as everyone anticipates. And such a touted goaltender, but there was a lot of rumors around maybe a trade, and I'm sure that causes stress on him, similar to the Markstrom deal, where there was a lot of talks about this organization potentially throwing it in and going towards the future. Now that they re-signed him, what did that move say for the future of this organization, that they're sticking by him and then sticking by some of those veteran guys looking to continue to win rather than regress and try to go for it years down the line from now?
Yeah, I don't think Askarov had a very solid basis to make his demand, in that he had sort of failed in the playoffs each of the last 2 seasons in Milwaukee, and they had to bring in Troy Grosnick to pick up the slack for what he was not able to do. And that really was one where I think when you figure out that they got 2 players back for him, plus the 3rd first-round draft choice for the 2025 draft that the Predators will now have, I think they emerged from this smelling like absolute roses. I mean, that was an outstanding move that Barry Trotz was able to make. And he was able to make it because of relationships, and his relationship in this case with San Jose general manager Mike Breer. I think they had a great deal of conversation before all of that. And then this trade, which might end up being very good for Askarov too.
I'll look around the Central Division. We'll close on this, let you get to your appearance here.
Okay.
Looking at the Central, there's all kinds of opportunity right now for Nashville. I could see them being a number 2 easily with the additions they have. Dallas still expected to be a powerhouse, and obviously a lot of talent there and a lot of success recently. But other than that, Colorado is a team that's up to the brim with their salary cap situation. Winnipeg's dealing with the coaching change there. Nashville vastly improved, and that comes along with a Utah team that's supposed to be on the come up, a St. Louis team that made that aggressive move to pick up some young players from Edmonton that's going to improve their team quite a bit. And then Minnesota, who also is in a lot of cap trouble, but they have a veteran roster that could make noise, no problem. And the up-and-coming Chicago Blackhawks, who I think had one of the most underrated off seasons. Not that it'll necessarily get them to a playoff position, but it's going to be a lot better for the progression of their young guys. How do you see this Central Division breaking down when you look at the potential for really anybody to get into the playoffs? Maybe who are some teams that you think could be major surprises, whether that's either in progress or regress?
I think Utah is going to be one of those surprise teams this year. They've been poised, and it's how often, it happens as we have not that many franchise moves. But I'm remembering when Quebec went to Denver and they won a Stanley Cup their first year. I'm not predicting a cup for the Utah Hockey Club, but I'm predicting that they could make a big bit of noise in the division. But I really think the team that I'm watching to see how they respond is going to be the club that gets out of salary cap hell after this season, the Minnesota Wild, because I value greatly Bill Guerin's judgment as how he tries to build a hockey club. And he was teammates with my broadcast partner, Hal Gill, on the Pittsburgh Penguins. And they remember lifting up something called Lord Stanley back in 2009 in that particular celebration.
With Colorado and the problems they have incoming, also some contracts upcoming, Cal McCarr is going to have to get done eventually, and Mikko Rantanen as well. What can they do? They don't even have a full roster right now, and we're 3 weeks away from puck drop.
Right. They don't have a full roster. They are tied up against it. And I think right now, Joe Sakic is happy. He's upstairs and no longer the general manager, so doesn't have that immediate headache weighing down on him. But I think that this is a club that's going to be doing very, very well for itself, as long as they don't have to dig into their depth, because they don't have much of that particular quantity right now.
Last one for you, and back to the fantasy talk here. Should the Ditzel's Dogs keep Philip Forsberg as the 13th rounder as a keeper league when he's going up in the top of the drafts?
I think you should definitely put a hold on him. Don't let him get away. And then can you add Stamkos and Marchessault too?
I'll do my best on it. Pete, I'm looking forward to your appearance in the pads up in Rochester next time you're up there as our penalty kill specialist. Really appreciate the time and the quick breakdown of the Nashville Predators, and exceptionally looking forward to getting back to listening to you on the radio, breaking it down, as the Predators are going to be chasing the top of the Central Division coming up pretty soon.
Casey, thank you so very much. I'm cutting back on my road trips. I'm only going to go to a limited number of places but I want you to know I'll be doing Buffalo, I'll be doing Chicago, I'll be doing Los Angeles, and I'm going to do my 66th NHL rink in April when we go to Utah.
I'll make sure that I'm making the road trip down to come see you when you're in Buffalo. Pete, thanks a bunch.
All right. Thank you, Casey. I appreciate the time.
We want to extend a big thank you to Pete Weber, and especially I would like to say thank you. Pete's been a guy who has been a great mentor for me since the time I met him right when I got into broadcasting. He's looked over my tapes a couple of times and always has been willing to come on shows like this. He came on my radio show my sophomore year of college when I first started getting into radio, and just a great person on top of being a great personality of the game. Awesome to hear him talk about his pride and joy in the Nashville Predators. He's been there since year one in Nashville. On to the rest of the Pacific Division here. Next up is the Dallas Stars, and for the rest of the show, we'll go in order of last year's standings. Dallas, number one in the West last season, but some big-time losses as they head to this upcoming year. They lose Chris Tanev to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They trade out Radek Foska and Ty Dellandrea. Joe Pavelski retired. They bought out Ryan Suter. They lose Scott Wedgwood. For this upcoming year, they did not add too much, and a lot of that's going to come out of relying on their young depth. A lot of big-name, up-and-coming players. We saw breakout seasons from Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven. Thomas Harley, a breakout season on the defensive blue line for them last year. He's going to need to pick up a lot of slack coming into this season. And then a lot of talk around Maverick Bourque, who's one of their top prospects that spent a lot of last year in the AHL. After seeing those veteran names leave and retire, looking at the young guys here, what impact are these young stars going to have in this system immediately for Dallas to have success? What impact do you guys see them having in this upcoming season?
I think a lot of it is going to have to do with the leadership that's still there in Dallas, right? When you lose someone as big in a room as a Joe Pavelski, even Ryan Suter, who got bought out, a Chris Tanev, all of those are big time locker room players, right? Locker room guys that kind of help feed along your youngins. Wyatt Johnston was very open with his relationship, and so can whoever's left there, the Tyler Sagans, even Jason Robertson, as young as he is, Jamie Benn, can they lead Maverick Bourque and Wyatt Johnston into big boy hockey? That's the big question. That's it's doable, but it's going to be a little more difficult to bring these youngins up to speed that quickly.
Yeah, and I think even more importantly is getting that defense in line in front of Jake Ottinger. I think, they made a ton of moves at the deadline last year to put themselves in a really good position going into the playoffs, but obviously you can't keep all those people. So losing Suter and losing Chris Tanev, you bring in guys like Brennan Smith and Ilya Lyubushkin and Matt Dumba to kind of fill those gaps. Are they going to be able to step up and play solid hockey in front of Ottinger so that it's not, Jake Ottinger can go out and win you a game if he needs to, but I think if you alleviate the pressure off of him, then allow your forward group to get out on the breakout and kind of show the stars that they can become. Talking about Johnston and Stankoven, I think this team is obviously one of the front runners in the Central, and it's going to be pretty obvious come December, January when they're, I think, pretty far and ahead of the remainder of this division. I think Dallas is poised for a really good season this year. I think that top six, that top nine, not only are they skilled, but they're physical. They're a team you just don't want to play night in and night out. And I think that defense will make the strides they need to.
George, Matt talks about goaltending. That's a reason that you're down a little bit on the Dallas Stars this year. Ottinger, we saw some shakiness, ups and downs over the past couple of seasons. You think Wedgwood's a huge loss. Matt, you're on the opposite side of that bringing in DeSmith is going to be just as good of a replacement for the backup position. But I'll open it to George first, and then Matt, your thoughts with Ottinger specifically. How important is his game going to have to be? How on top of it is he going to have to be now that they've lost some defensive pieces like Tanev, like Dellandrea?
It's going to be huge. And as a goalie, you're already out on an island. It's the most individual position in all of sports, in any sport that has the goalkeeper position, right? When you have, a second line defense projected right now, Brendan Smith and Matt Dumba. Okay. We all know what Brendan Smith is. He's, for better or worse, Ilya Lyubushkin on the third line. That puts a lot more pressure on Esa Lindell and Miro Heiskanen. But now Otter and the organization, they don't have that, okay, we're going to rest Otter for a stretch here. And we're going to just, we're just going to put in Scott Wedgwood. Wedgwood was fantastic in his starts that he came in. I believe it was like 3/4 of the way through the season just to give Otter an extra break before the playoffs. And he was great. They're not going to have that anymore. I don't think I don't think DeSmith is the same goalkeeper as Wedgwood.
And I think in the role that DeSmith will have to play, we've seen this time and time again from DeSmith, backing up the likes of Marc-Andre Fleury and / Matt Murray in the early days of Pittsburgh. And then when Tristan Jarry became the full-time starter there, when Patrick Demko went down before Arthur Silvos kind of took over that spot, DeSmith was the guy they leaned on, and he played really well in those 4 or 5 games in that playoff run before injuries. I think the gap between DeSmith and Wedgwood is, marginal at best. And I think overall, in terms of Ottinger's play, I think he's, every year he plays in the league, he's going to get more confident and kind of mold into that goaltender that everyone thinks he's going to be. He's still below 30 in terms of age, and a lot of goalies kind of age like fine wine. So I feel like we haven't seen the best of Ottinger yet, and we've already seen really good out about Ottinger. So, this is a guy who can win you 5-10 games on his own.
Yeah, I know, by the way, he's in a contract here.
On to the Winnipeg Jets. Coaching transition as Rick Bowness has retired. The Jets hire Scott Arniel as their head coach. Some major losses during the offseason. Brendan Dillon and Tyler Toffoli, Sean Monahan, Laurent Boissois. They trade away Rutger McGroarty, the most recent top prospect that has since signed with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Winnipeg wanted him to spend one more year in the NCAA. He did not. He hence gets traded out. They get a prospect back, a 14th overall pick for a 14th overall pick. They add just Capo Kakinen, Eric Comrie, and defenseman Colin Miller. Cole Perfetti, a big name who remains an unsigned RFA. Perfetti outwardly had problems with Rick Bowness, and the two of them didn't get along, where Bowness wanted him to develop more. He felt he should be playing top 6, if not top line minutes there. He remains unsigned here. One of the bigger names remaining now that we're getting closer to the season. We've started to see some of the RFAs get dealt with. As we look forward to this season, one, do we see Perfetti being in Winnipeg? I think so. But also on top of that, after such a very difficult season, where do we think the contract's going to come in? What's Perfetti going to have to do to prove himself in the upcoming years? It's got to be a bridge deal, I would think, if he gets signed there.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Casey. It's got to be a bridge deal. 2 years. I'm thinking back to maybe Alexis Lafreniere and his deal with the Rangers. 2 years, 2.5, something like that. 3 years, 3. Something along those lines, just to kind of prove it, say, okay, I fought. I think I deserve to be here. I'm going to prove to you I deserve to be here. Give me this money, and then we'll talk about more money in the future. But give me this money now, and you're going to give me a lot more in the future when I prove it.
Yeah, and I think he's going to have every opportunity to. You lose Tyler Toffoli and Sean Monahan. That's 2 guys in the top 6 that you're going to have to replace. Perfetti's got flexibility on the wing. I think he's more comfortable in that center position. There's definitely an opening behind Mark Scheifele. I think it's his 2C to lose. And, in a prove-it year, I think Perfetti is going to be able to thrive under a new coach. A lot of guys need just like a change of scenery. But, with the brand new coaching staff in, I think there's a potential for him to kind of mold into the player that a lot of people think Perfetti is going to be. The one guy I do want to talk about in terms of losing guys in the top 6, I'm very, very high on Gabe Vilardi. I think he played an unbelievable two-way game. Big power forward up top, puts the puck in the net, up there with a lot of the guys that, we talked about with Nashville's new additions. In my opinion, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And I think we've seen so many flashes of Gabe Vilardi. I really hope they give him that opportunity to play, 18, 19 minutes a night on that top line and just let him thrive. And hopefully he doesn't get injured again. But I'm very high on Vilardi. I love the way he played with the Kings. And I think, an absolute steal in that PLD trade was the ability to get Vilardi in your top 6 and let him thrive.
I absolutely don't know what to do with the Winnipeg Jets. We'll get to our rankings towards the end of the show, but looking at the roster on paper, they are very difficult to beat. Connor Scheifele, Vilardi, Ehlers, Perfetti potentially, Morgan Barron, a Cornell guy I got to spend a lot of time watching in the ECAC. That's the top 6 projected. Then the bottom 6 is just as deep with Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton is the third line, Gustafsson, Nemestikov, and Iafallo is another guy who came in that trade with Vilardi from the Kings, an outstanding depth player. Their defense is just as strong. Morrissey and Pionk. The second line, maybe a little weaker, Sandberg and Miller. I love Dylan DeMello. I think, the loss on the defensive end of Brendan Dillon is going to be tough for them. I think we're going to see a lot of regression in the coaching style. I think Rick Bowness did such a good job getting that team into relevance immediately as he took over. It'll be interesting to see how Scott Arniel can take what the Jets have accomplished over the last series of years and continue that forward. On that, George, you mentioned the going back to Perfetti quickly, but the Lafreniere deal. How smart do the Rangers look now? And we're going to talk about the news as well with Lucas Raymond getting signed, Sidney Crosby getting signed. How smart does that Lafreniere deal look after a guy who made absolute madness against teams in the playoffs, and they get him done at $2.5 million here? That's a conversation for another time. But going back to Winnipeg here, the coaching change in Winnipeg, I think again that's where Winnipeg could have their downfall in such a difficult Central Conference here. Where do you guys see Winnipeg after the coaching change? Will they be relevant again back at the top of the conference, or do you guys see them kind of similar to me, regressing potentially to a fringe wildcard team, maybe out of the playoff spot?
I have them regressing, not too far out, but I do see them making the playoffs out of this in this division. But they're not going to be top 3. Not for me.
I go back and forth on it every about 25 seconds looking at this roster. Personally, you ask me in 25 seconds, I might be like, you know what? Maybe they can fight with Dallas. Maybe they can fight with Nashville. But I think realistically, there's just too many teams in that division that are top to bottom probably better and have a lot more firepower, which I think if it comes down to it towards the end of the season and you're fighting for points, you need your Nathan McKinnons and you need your Jason Robertsons to just step up and win you games. So I do think Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele and Nikolai Ehlers are great players, but I don't think there's any track record in their careers of them going and winning games for Winnipeg. Otherwise, we'd be talking about them, on deep playoff runs year in and year out.
Next team is going to have the hottest take of all surrounding them. I'll save that for the rankings projections, but the Colorado Avalanche, a team in desperate trouble right now as we continue to near training camp with the Ottawa Senators in a similar position. Both those two teams just listed do not have full rosters constructed. For Colorado, they are currently missing 3 forwards and a goaltender, $2.84 million of cap to work with looking forward. The additions so far, it was Curtis McDermott coming through trade. They lose Sean Walker and Brandon Duhaime and Jakob Trenin. Colorado is going to be carried just as they have by their top guys. You still have Arturi Lehkonen, Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen. You still have Devon Taves, Cal McCarr, obviously. Casey Middlestat was an outstanding addition from Buffalo at the trade deadline. He's going to have to play a huge role here as a second line center. But George, you're down big time on Colorado. Matt, interested to hear your thoughts there. What can they even do here with just 2.8 million? It's going to have to come. It's got to come in the form of rookie contracts and looking at their prospect pool, and maybe our guy Christian Humphreys gets a little bit of a nod. I know he'll be a freshman at Michigan this year, but who knows if by the time they get close to playoffs, they'll be maybe signing some ELCs.
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail right on the head right there. The hopes that, maybe Michigan doesn't get a complete run. Excuse me, and they have him in to sign and be ready to go. I think that's their biggest hope. Otherwise, they're in dire straits when it comes to the cap.
Yeah, and I think obviously depth is going to be a huge issue for this team. I think there's going to have to be some sort of internal step up from the AHL. But I think the opportunity of PTOs, and I still think there's, some guys on the market here. I think I saw a tweet from somebody about Phil Kessel. Like, why is he not at least getting a shot on this Colorado roster, right? Like, I think he still has the ability to play, sheltered minutes of maybe 12 to 13 a night, but giving him some time with McKinnon or Rantanen, good players can skate with good players. And Phil Kessel is so close to 1,000 points. He's a good player. There's many other players that are available on the PTO deal that I think Colorado just has to take advantage of at this point. But I think overall, this team still has a really solid defensive core, and I think that's going to carry them this year more than you would think. I think Taves and McCarr is one of the more unstoppable defensive pairings almost of all time at this point, with the defensive play of Devon Taves and obviously Cal McCarr being a generational talent. But I think the bottom pair here is where I'm kind of interested in seeing two pretty highly thought of prospects in Eric Brandstrom and Oliver Shillington getting some very low prove-it deals. And I think at least one of the two of them have the opportunity to potentially step up in a more elevated role and an opportunity to play on a solid team in Colorado. So I think that defense is going to be the main X factor for them, and why I still think they're a playoff team. I mean, to be honest, if you have Nathan McKinnon on your team, it's going to be really hard to miss the playoffs.
Phil Kessel's career is far over. It's a guy who openly eats the Casey Ditzel diet, and Vancouver gave it a shot right around the deadline. They were looking for an extra piece. They brought him to the AHL team, and he couldn't even skate with their AHL guys. And he's going to take a buyout from the Saudis when the 3v3 league allegedly becomes a thing. But unfortunately, and I'm not saying was not a great player. He's an exceptional player whose time has just come, and age catches everybody eventually. Unfortunately, he doesn't quite have the speed I think needed, especially to play on this Colorado team, along with the names that you put down on that line. I think the top line is going to be able to carry. I think those guys can eat 25 to 30 minutes a night, and we're going to see every inch of that played out of this Colorado team. But somebody's going to have to step in. For me, it's Casey Middlestat. I think that's a player that had a lot of success. Jonathan Drouin projected to go right with him in the top 6 on the right wing. Both of those guys fit so well into this Colorado lineup immediately from coming over. For you guys, with the glaring gaps that this team has to find a way to figure out, because they're not going to go out with 3 lines or less than that, even like Clarkson did against Colgate during the COVID season. Which players do you guys see that need to step up into bigger roles this season for Colorado to have any success?
I think offensively, it's Ross Colton. I think he's disappointed in that 3C position, especially at $4 million a year. He's proven he could play better than that in Tampa. I think he needs to step up, offensively. Defensively, Matt already mentioned it, Shellington, right? I think he has the opportunity to move himself up into the second pairing rather than get buried on the third pairing and only get like 10 minutes of ice time a game, if that. And if those two players can prove themselves and allow the coaching staff to put them out there for more minutes, I hear what you're saying, Casey, in regards to that top line of McKinnon and Rantanen and, Lehkonen and whoever else is going to be on there. But 25 to 30 minutes a night for them does not equal a good idea for 82 games. They're just going to get gassed if you're just rolling them out and rolling them out.
I agree. I think you need to, load management in a sense there with your top guys so that you're not coming into the playoffs completely burned out. Obviously I think Colton's a huge X factor playing on both sides, but for me, I'm going to say Miles Wood. I think last year he really didn't get a huge opportunity, and I think his entire career he really hasn't gotten a huge opportunity. Former high first round pick, and just didn't fit into the mold of New Jersey, and comes to Colorado now where he's playing with more skilled players. He's getting an opportunity to play, with guys who are going to get him an opportunity to score. And his entire career, he's had a flash in the pan of, that scoring upside that you want on the wing. And he's always been a very solid two-way player. So I think, he might have to step up and play finally, that 15, 16 minutes a night. Can he step into that role and really hit his potential in terms of offensive upside to help this team score outside of their top two guys?
The big pieces missing are the potential of Landeskog and Val Nichushkin, which are extremely interesting to me. And Landeskog has been adamant that he's going to come back from an injury that a lot of people said there was absolutely no chance of. So whether that happens or not, that's the first question that's really hindering their cap, because he keeps saying he's going to come back. Val Nichushkin, I wonder if it will ever work again in Colorado. 2 years in a row, he has devastated that team with the hotel incident, with whatever happened there in Seattle, and then last year with the personal issue that potentially revolved around a drug complication, and now in the player assistance program. And you wonder if he still has the love of that locker room. And I think he's an exceptional player. And if you add those two pieces anywhere near top form, that's where I think if you could play, Nichushkin's out until probably mid-November. Then we'll find out whether or not they have $8 million of cap to play with for a trade, or if he's banished from the NHL. Either way, he either comes back to the lineup or he doesn't. That's where I think you could play those guys until November, where McKinnon and Makar would be the big one I would worry about, because he's had a little bit of injury issues, in short term. No huge injuries, but he has missed time. If he's out, they're in trouble. But if you can just get to that point where Nichushkin can get back, if Landeskog gets back, if you get both those names, that lineup gets right back to being unbelievably scary again, regardless of who they sign on entry-level PTOs or whatever. St. Louis is next up. They went and decimated the news market of the NHL offseason and just get all the fans rallied up, ready to go here for the upcoming season. Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg get stolen, essentially, from Edmonton via offer sheet. Edmonton, they knew were not going to have the funds to bring back those guys on the contracts they offered. With the upcoming deals now, Draisaitl done, Connor McDavid upcoming, Bouchard upcoming, they swipe them right away. And St. Louis now adds Holloway and Broberg. They get Ryan Suter with the benefit of the buyout from Dallas. Matthew Joseph joins his brother, Radek Faksa, Adam Juracek, Kasperi Kapanen. They only lose Jacob Vrana. A lot of young names, a couple of veterans, and it seems like this St. Louis team continues to stay relevant, where they win the Stanley Cup. They've been kind of a fringe team since then. Last year, they just missed out 6 teams outside the mark, or 6 points, outside the mark of making the playoffs. Now coming into this year, do you guys see them being an immediate threat after a couple of those additions, where they've now addressed some of those scoring problems with young weapons that are going to be there for the long term?
I do. I think they'll make the playoffs this year. I have them high up in our division, outlook. I really like what St. Louis did. I love the fact you mentioned it, Casey. They just came in and they just sniped away Holloway and Broberg, and that proved out to be important. The Broberg addition, with the news of Torrey Krug being gone for the season, nobody can really replace Torrey Krug. I mean, he's your PP1 quarterback. He's your quarterback on the ice. It's just his hockey IQ, his vision on the ice is tremendous. But it's everything else that is shaken out for this roster has been for the better, and they'll land in the top portion of the division because of that.
And you mentioned the Torrey Krug injury. Now you've got that on LTIR. You've got some opportunities to be flexible towards the deadline and make a really big acquisition to that decor, which is where I think if you're going to go somewhere in terms of adding to this team, I would say getting a perennial, 1D that isn't Colton Parayko or Justin Falk is probably best case scenario for this roster. But I'm very high on the St. Louis as well. I really liked the depth pieces they added. You look at Matthew Joseph and Radik Foska. Those are bottom six guys who are so valuable on the penalty kill. And they already have a guy like Oscar Sundqvist and Alexei Toropchenko, who are big physical forwards. Dylan Holloway's got great skill in that third line to put a little bit of offensive spark down the bottom six. And you keep the same top six that, got you to 92 points last year very sneakily, with guys who, are always just undervalued in the league. I think Robert Thomas is one of, if not the most underrated players in the NHL, just not year in and year out, putting up, almost or at a point per game. You put them on the wing with Kyrou and Neighbors, who both show that they can play up in that top six. And then, one of the better contracts in the league with Buchnevich with Shen and Saad. I can't say any more any more good things about this team. I think this is just in a really good situation for the Blues to rely heavily on their players to, get them to the playoffs. And then you look at their goaltending. I think Binnington or Hofer, I think one of them, play the hot hand. Both have showed flashes of being a starting caliber goaltender. And you got two options there to potentially ride. So, for me, I'm all in on St. Louis this year.
Jordan Binnington, the opportunity to win a Stanley Cup, get a shutout, or the opportunity to see a goaltender fight. It doesn't get much better than that. Torrey Krug, with some terribly saddening news out of St. Louis, in a very emotional press conference, announced that he would miss the entire 2024-25 season. He had season-ending injury and what could be the end of his career. From the sound of that press conference, he was in tears, and kind of the concept of an aging guy that now has to have a tough surgery. Similar to Kessel, you lose a little bit of that step, and it's tough to keep your contracts around. Krug was such an important part of this St. Louis decor. What void do you guys see his absence leaving? And they bring in Broberg. Is that a guy that can fill the talent gap that Krug's going to have? And looking at their decor with, some of the other potentials to fill in maybe some power play time. You could get Parayko, maybe Justin Falk filling that. Perunovic also with offensive upside. But Krug played in all situations, could eat minutes. How much of an impact is that going to have on the St. Louis team?
Oh, that's major. That's a major loss to both the locker room and, the play on the ice. I already touched upon it. PP1, he's the quarterback. Maybe Justin Falk could step in and provide, not Torrey Krug level support on the power play, but something that's going to get you by. It's interesting that you mentioned Perunovic. Perunovic, he could easily slide into that PP1 situation as long as he gets the right look, right? If he gets enough opportunities to be on the ice, I think he could slide into that position as well. But it's, just horrible news for Torrey Krug. I saw him being in New England, got to see him a lot playing with the Bruins, and everyone around here was distraught when he was, when St. Louis grabbed him, and he's done nothing but consistently, play at a high level anywhere he's been. So It's a big loss for not just St. Louis, but for the world of hockey too, if it is, the end for him.
George, you're stealing my thunder here. I had Perunovic's stats right up here. I was so excited to discuss Perunovic here. But, I think, he's been a point per game for 3 years at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Plays 2 years in the AHL at a point per game. He just produces everywhere that he plays. So I think for me, like, this is his first going to be full NHL season. Give him an opportunity on that left side. Why not? I think guys who produce at every level, at some point they're not. I don't think Scott Perunovich is going to be a point per game in the NHL, but if he's able to put up 35, 40 points and kind of fill that void that Torrey Krug is going to have, I think that's a great opportunity for the Blues.
And close to home for Matt, go Gophs. The Minnesota Wild, they made their big news with a re-signing of their rookie talent and a guy who made a run at the Calder, and Brock Faber signed on an 8-year, $8 million contract extension. Minimal additions and minimal losses for them. They add Jakob Trenin. They lose Vinny Lettieri. Looking at this Minnesota team, it stays pretty much the same. They're still in cap hell for one more year. But after massive regression last year, a lot of that could be attributed to certain injuries at the wrong times. One more year before they can really make a splash, and boy, oh boy, are they going to be dangerous 1 year from now on July 1st. But this year, what does Minnesota need to do to become a contender again? They went from being almost an automatic thought of a top 3 in the Central Conference to not even sniffing the playoffs last year. Now everyone's automatically counting them out. I think they're one of the most interesting teams that didn't really lose anybody, still has a lot of offensive prowess, and could easily get right back in there with the blink of an eye.
Yeah, that's exactly why I have them in the playoff picture in the division, Casey, because this roster is wholly unchanged pretty much. The addition, I really like the addition of Yakov Cherna. I loved him ever since he was in Milwaukee, when he got the sniff, when he got the cup of coffee with Nashville, and then gets to Colorado, now Minnesota. I think he has the opportunity to elevate the bottom 6 for the Wild this season. But everybody else is there. And Faber, they did the right thing. They had the money, pay the kid the money, and, let that, salary cap increase next year to deal with things next year that you have to, but take care of your guy first. And Faber's a Minnesota guy through and through. Why not take care of him?
You lose your captain for an entire season pretty much, and it's really tough, not only for the play on the ice, but in the locker room. I think, getting Spurgeon back and having that guy who's been the voice of that defense for the past 5 or 6 years, I would say, is really helpful. But, we mentioned injuries being a problem last year. I think injuries are a problem for every team every single year. And the fact that they did nothing to address the glaring holes that they had after 1 or 2 players went down last year is kind of the reason I'm still concerned with Minnesota this year. Obviously, the cap hell that they've been in is kind of that reason that they kind of have to go, a more light approach. But I think Minnesota is just a piece or two away of depth from being able to really be a big time contender here. If they get an injury on the left side of that defense, or, somebody on the right wing, like, you're going to have guys who, historically are not players that you're going to want to play either in your top 6 or on top 4 minutes on your defense. And, there are many other teams in the Central that are really deep this year and have, a lot more strong, AHL systems / bottom 6 guys that can come in and fill in to some of those holes in the top 6. And I think, the same issues that Minnesota had last year, I think they're an injury or 2 away from running into again this year. So for me, I just think, with a strong Central, being complacent almost makes you a little bit worse in this division.
Injuries were exactly what got them last year. They are a team that is, interestingly enough, projected over the cap right now by 18.5 thousand, which is not much considering that, the difference of a guy on a $900,000 ELC or a $775,000 player could switch that. So you send the right guy down to the AHL. But Minnesota this year, they, as you mentioned, Matt, better hope that everybody can stay healthy, and they need all of those stars gunning at the exact same time. Utah Hockey Club, the new face of the NHL, the Arizona Coyotes, excavated, and I'm not sure if you guys caught much of the final game there in the Mullet Arena, but I have absolutely no affiliation to the Arizona Coyotes, and I had tears streaming down my face watching that last game and the outpouring of love from the crowd and the diehard fans. What really got me was the broadcasters that had been there from the start, crying on air and saying that, and oh boy, that one hit home. But they now move on and head to Utah. Sergachev, the big addition, traded just before July 1st. They extend Valimaki and Sean Durzi. Many are very high on Utah. And it's a team that has been on the come up for years, from the bottom of the barrel, a long playoff drought in Arizona, a ton of young talent for this team. How do we predict the hockey club in their first inaugural season here?
I still have them missing the playoffs. They're still young. I don't think they have the one or two guys that could put the team on their back, whether it's offensively or defensively or even in net, that'll say, come on, come ride me. We'll get to the promised land. Don't you worry. I just think that's where they're at. It was an unfortunate situation, that whole situation where you have, just before the final game, the entire front office getting an email, including their content producers, like, hey, thanks, we're going to deactivate all your stuff, so don't even bother. Sort of thing. It was only like the executives that were left. It's just an awful way for that to end. And, hopefully it's a new start for Utah. They seem, if I'm not mistaken, they sold out all their season tickets at the Delta Center. So they have a rabid fan base there ready to rock and roll. Let's see if they could give them something to continuously cheer about, but I don't think they're a playoff team this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned the lack of, the guy on the team. And I think for years, Clayton Keller has really kind of been the face of the Coyotes. And I'm very high on Clayton Keller, but nobody can ever do it themselves, especially a guy that's, unless you're Connor McDavid. But, two guys to look out for this year that I think, could potentially mold into that kind of player, Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther. Both of them showed really strong flashes towards the end of last season when Arizona started to make a little bit of a push out of the barrel. And they're both going to get some very good opportunities to play up in the lineup. I think, one, if not both of them, will be able to skate on that top line with Keller this year, which I think would be a really interesting first line. I do love Nick Schmaltz, but I think he can drive his own line on the second line and really give the opportunity for Cooley and Gunther to strive up there. But like you mentioned, George, nothing wows me about the Utah Hockey Club this year. That, the goaltending is, you might get a really fun game where Vejmelka has 47 saves here and there, but, they're getting 52 shots against and they lose 5-4. Sergachev's a really solid addition on the defense, but who else is going to step up there? I like the idea of Durzi and Marino, but are they guys who can eat 23, 24 minutes a night? Personally, I don't think so. I think they're still a year or two out, but I think there's definitely in the right direction going for Utah.
I'm in the opposite spot, and you say they don't have the guy. That whole top line with Schmaltz, Keller, and Krause all, can make power play imprints. Durzi now doesn't have to run the top power play. You got Sergachev coming in, who's an absolute force, Stanley Cup champion, has been the guy. I think right there, Sergachev is your guy, and he can eat minutes, eat everything you need on the power play for those stars to shine. And then they have the young talent coming. Barrett Hayton is an unbelievable player on the right wing, listed right now on the third line, but he'll be a top 6 guy. He could be a top liner even. Logan Cooley is the future of this team that you mentioned. But on the goaltending side, you guys both seem to have fears there. That's the one thing that I think is going to almost be locked up. Connor Ingram at a $1.9 million salary, I think, is the absolute future face of this franchise, and a guy who I am extremely high on. He performed phenomenally for the Coyotes last year. Vejmelka was out for some time with the injury. Ingram comes in and ate the load, kept him in the playoff picture for a little while. That was back at the first half of the season when they were up in the playoff contention before they dropped off. But this young core, they've shown spurts that they have it in them, where last year, like I said, in the first half of the year, they were on a push to potentially make a run at the playoffs. Now you add veterans into that lineup, and I think Utah could be a sneaky good team upcoming this year. The last team from the bottom of the barrel last year, the Chicago Blackhawks. They continue to get closer and closer and closer. And if it wasn't for how bad the team was last year and the year before, I would say Chicago had a top 3, if not pushing number 1, July 1st offseason. They add Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Pat Maroon, Joey Anderson, Laurent Brossoit, Alec Martinez, and Craig Smith. The offensive pieces are the biggest of those, I think, and specifically Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen. Connor Bedard had absolutely nobody around him. Now you add 2 proven guys that have played in playoff scenarios, have gotten their teams and led their teams to the playoffs. You add that now around Connor Bedard. That's the future of the franchise, is Project Bedard in Chicago. And most notably, they don't sign anybody on long-term deals. Everybody they got coming in is 3 or 4 year deals. So they're going to have those guys craft Bedard and then either keep them around on maybe lower salaries as they get older, or they can bring in who they want as the salary cap goes up. How important are some of these assets that they've brought in going to be to Connor Bedard? And on top of that, going from a team that was right down with the San Jose Sharks last year, Matt, do you guys see Chicago improving? I think this is a team that, if they catch the right stride, could be, I don't think they're making the playoffs in any sense, but could be right there with like a Coyotes team last year that at one point had themselves in the playoff picture.
I think the big.
Go ahead,
sorry.
George.
No, go right ahead, Matt. Go.
I was going to say, you look at the Sharks and you look at the Blackhawks. I think both teams obviously made, moves with the money that they had. But I think the DraftKings line, I didn't choose this one as one of my 3, but I did want to mention, I think the DraftKings line for them is 73.5 this year. Is this team 20 points, 10 wins better than the prior season? Personally, I don't think so. You mentioned the 2 guys in Bertuzzi and Teravainen, and I think, the past couple of years, I think both players have been, more of a complementary piece in those lineups. I'm not sure either of them are first line caliber players, personally. I think Bertuzzi had an opportunity to play with guys like Matthews and Marner, Tavares and Nylander. Come playoff time, he was playing on that third line, and they gave the opportunity to Domi and Nyes. You look at Teravainen, very similar situation. He was in that second line contention, but he wasn't really getting, that Aho opportunity. And I think, the guy that I really think is the big X factor for Connor Bedard is Taylor Hall. I think early on in the season, the 2 of them had unbelievable chemistry and really let Bedard spark. And I'd be shocked if they don't at least start the season with that same combination for the left wing and center on that first line. But again, this team still is just a ways away. I think, the defense is going to be interesting. I think Alex Vlasic is somebody who I'm pretty high on. They just gave him a massive extension, and I think he absolutely deserved it. Kevin Korchin is going to have to step up and play a lot more minutes. I think, a guy like Lucas Reichel is another player who I'm very high on as well. They currently have him on the fourth line, but I think he's a guy who you can put in your top six and really strive. And, I would personally prefer to give him that kind of opportunity as opposed to some of the guys that you bring in on these shorter term deals. But, this team is still pieces away. You can't completely go from 52 points to contention in one season. I think, their ceiling might be 70, around that number. And I've been nice because I haven't said anything about their goaltending, but it could be one of, if not the worst tandems in the entire league. So for me, I think this team is still, especially in a tough Central, that I'd be shocked if they're not the 8th seed in this conference or in this division.
That was it for me. It's the goaltending. I don't think that. I love Peter Mrazek, the guy that got Carolina into the playoffs and cracked one of the biggest droughts in NHL history. But he's an aging asset there, Arvid Soderblom, and on top of that, the defense is not great. Maybe Lev Shinov comes in. Hopefully, he's going to be injured for at least through November. Hopefully, they can get him sooner than later to mold him into an NHL player. But yeah, I'm in the same boat. But I could see 10 wins better. I do think that's in the realm of possibility. I think this team is significantly better than they were last year. George, sorry I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say Matt stole my thunder with the Tyler Bertuzzi note. I was going to go the year before that with Boston. He had the opportunity to play with Bergeron while Bergeron was still there, Marchand and Pasternak, and he just couldn't handle that top line. Just couldn't do it. He's not the top line guy. So I agree with Matt there. I'd be interested to see maybe a Hall, Bedard, and Reichel line, or Hall, Bedard, and Kurashev to see how that shakes out as a top line. Because I honestly don't think Teravainen and Bertuzzi are going to do any good for Bedard as his wingmates.
Two things you mentioned there, George, that I want to harp on as well. I think the first one, if you're trying to shape Connor Bedard's future, getting a guy like Kurashev or Reichel, somebody who's young and on long term, and getting that chemistry built is going to be really important. I think getting a veteran on one side and then getting a young guy and giving them an opportunity to play with Bedard is going to really help the future of this team. And second, like you mentioned with Bertuzzi, I do still think he brings a ton of value to a team. He's a great bottom six guy. He's a scrappy player, and he brings fight to this Chicago team. My apologies, that had no fight last year. You could tell they were, completely out of most games, and nobody was stepping up and, doing anything about it. This team's down a few goals and somebody takes exception, and Bertuzzi's going to be in there and defending anyone that's on this team. So I think it's a great addition for Chicago, but I don't think it's the addition that made the most sense for Connor Bedard specifically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's also why they brought in Pat Maroon too, right? Because there was no grittiness on that team. So the addition of Bertuzzi, the addition of Maroon, but I'm glad we're in agreement. It's not, if Bertuzzi's the right piece to bring in, just not for Connor Bedard.
First time in now episode 3 of Division Breakdowns, we have significant differences in our projected rankings for the first 2 episodes. Looking at the Metro and looking at the Pacific, we've been pretty smack on. Everybody's kind of been around the same, other than maybe some thoughts around the Capitals and the Carolina Hurricanes in the Metro. All 3 of us have pretty vastly different thoughts on how this is going to shake out, starting with the top 3s. Let's go through it all here, and I'll start. I guess let's do how we did it last week. Let's start with those who don't make the playoffs. Every single one of us have 5 teams out of this conference making it in the West. For me, the 3 that don't, and I sat on this one forever. I think every single team, and I'll take Chicago out, I think 7 of 8 have a legitimate chance of being not only top 5 wild card, anybody gets in. I think every team 1 through 7 could make it in the top 3 of this division. My 3 out, Chicago at the bottom is 8th. Minnesota is going to be my 7 seed, and I could see them as the 3 easily. And Winnipeg does not make it. I think the coaching change is going to take some time to gather steam. If they deal with any injuries, maybe some goaltending trouble, I have the Jets as the number 6 team and the first team out in the Central. Matt.
You know, it's funny. I almost said, 110 points not making the playoffs. How is that even possible? And then I remember the New Jersey Devils last year. So I think anything is definitely possible on that front. My 3 teams that I don't have in, I have Chicago at the 8. Obviously, I just think they're a few steps away, maybe 2 to 3 years from really being in that contention. My number 7 is Utah. Like I mentioned before, just no star power up top, in my opinion, to really carry that team to a playoff position. And then Minnesota, depth's going to kill that team. And I think an injury or 2 really puts them, out of the playoff picture for me. So I think, again, like you said, I think Minnesota could even be the 3 in there. And I think guys like Boldy and Kaprizov are going to look unbelievable this year. But for me, I think if I had to pick one of those top 6 to fall out of the playoff race, I think the first one you see is Minnesota.
We're all in agreement with our 8 seed in Chicago. That thing and pretty much I think we're all in agreement with. Oh no, because Casey has
George,
Utah.
I think you only need to go bottom 2 here. We need to save this one for the end.
Okay. All right. So my bottom 2, my 8 seed is Chicago. No surprise there. Matt brought up 73.5 was the over or under for the wins this season. I don't even think they're going to crack 70. Utah is my number 8 seed, and I'll hold Colorado. I'll hold on request my 7 and out of playoff contention.
For me, the top seed is Dallas, without question. I think they're going to be a 110 plus point team. Nashville is going to be right there as my number 2. I have Nashville in the high 100s, maybe a 107, 108, 109 point team this year. And for me, Colorado is just too good. They're going to get 100 points. Maybe it's low hundreds. Nathan McKinnon is not going to let that team fall out of a playoff spot. The wild card is where it gets really interesting. I think St. Louis is going to be unbelievable this year. And I think they're going to be pushing high 90s. So I'll give them the first wild card. And last week, I gave it to Seattle. This week, I'm giving it to Utah. So I have 3 wild cards out of the West. If I have to do it, I think I'm taking Seattle out. Utah gets in this year. I think Connor Ingram's going to have a big season, bound for some goaltending success there. The Utah Hockey Club pulls a Vegas Golden Knights, their first season as a team in the NHL, their first playoff appearance.
It's very interesting to see. I think you might be the first and only person to ride the hand of Connor Ingram over Connor Hellebuck to make the playoffs. But, for me, I agree with you with Dallas. I think they're by far probably the best team in this division. And there are some really good teams in this division. I'm just super high on Dallas this year. And I think a lot of people are for all the right reasons. The forward group, the D core, the goaltending, they've got it all. And I think they're poised to make some deadline moves to add some pieces there and really be a problem in the West for Edmonton, who a lot of people have as the perennial favorite in the Western Conference. Now, my number 2, and I'm on the fence of making a switch here. I might just do it. I think St. Louis, like you mentioned, is going to be a really good team. Now, I think you talked about, St. Louis going to be really good, but you have them in their wild card. Why not put them as their number 2? Again, I'm pretty high. You're high on Ingram. I think the Binnington-Hofer combo is far and beyond better than the Ingram-Vejmelka combo. And I think, overall that team is really deep in the forward core. And I think those bottom 6 additions are going to make such a huge impact, especially a guy like Matthew Joseph. I'm very high on him this year in a sheltered penalty kill role, but that top 6 was really good last year. They were the number 16 team in the league last year. Unfortunately, didn't make the playoffs because they were the 9 seed in the West, but they were 6 points out of a playoff spot last year. And I think they can easily improve that point total by 5 to 10 points in a competitive Central Division. I think 100 to 102 could put you in that 2 spot. For me, number 3 is Nashville. I think everyone's going to be in agreement on how good Nashville is this year with the additions they made. And then my 2 wild cards, my wild card 1, I'm going to have Winnipeg. I think the coaching change definitely will have an impact, and I don't think they're going to be an 110-point team, but they're not 15 to 20 points worse than last year. I think they're in the mid to high 90s and going to be that wild card 1 off the back of Connor Hellebuck. And my wild card 2, we haven't mentioned the team yet, but I still think Colorado gets in. I think they're too talented at the star power of Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon to not be a playoff team. But I think until you get an answer on Landeskog and Achuskin and Anturi Lehkonen, it's going to be very, very scary the first 2 months. Obviously, last year, Edmonton was bottom of the barrel and still got to 110 points, but I'm still a little nervous on Colorado. So for me, that's the reason I have them at wild card 2.
It's interesting you brought up Edmonton turning things around with a new head coach, and it's interesting that Casey says a new head coach with Winnipeg, he has them out of the playoffs.
Okay, but I'm gonna just to clarify on why I have them out of the playoffs. I do not think they're gonna be a bad team. I think they're missing the playoffs with 97 points this season. I think this conference is just so good that looking at last year, there's only so many points to go around, yes, but each conference had 5 teams over 100 points. There's still the same amount of points to get allocated around. And looking at the way I broke down the Pacific, I think Edmonton's the only team over 100 in the Pacific. I don't think Vancouver had 109 last year. I do not think they're going to get to 100 this year. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think they regress. I don't think LA comes anywhere near 100. They had 99 last year. I think they're at least 10 lower this year. Vegas will be around the same. Calgary, we all agreed we think is going lower than that. But then even in the East side, I think New York stays high. Carolina is going to lose points. New Jersey, I guess, could pick up 20 somewhere. But in the Atlantic, we're going to get to that next week. I don't think the Atlantic's going to be as strong. We had 3 teams in the Atlantic that were in the 100 to 110 range, with Florida at 110. I think they go way down this year and make the playoffs as a 3 or a fringe wildcard team with some Stanley Cup hangover. Boston is going to be a mid-hundreds team. The Leafs are going to be a mid-hundreds team, but everything else is up for grabs. Those points have to go somewhere, and I think it's all going to be taken by this Central Conference with low to mid-100s. So I have Winnipeg out just because everyone else is so good. And sorry, George, I completely just absolutely capsized your rankings there. So the floor is all yours. Had to defend myself quick, though.
No, that's okay. That's what this is for, right? This is our little banter. So I actually have Nashville winning the division. I'm high on them. I love the additions that they brought in. I love the Brady Shea coming in. He's going to be instrumental at kind of taking some things off of Yossi's hands and mind, as far as hey, Shea can easily step in PP1 and run things. He could run the breakout. It's okay. He doesn't have to say, okay, am I going to rely on McDonough to try to do this? No. So I have Nashville winning the division. Dallas is my number 2. St. Louis is my number 3. Minnesota and Winnipeg can kind of flip-flop as wild card 1 or 2. I think Winnipeg gets in. I don't think the addition of Scotty Arniel behind the bench is going to be too much of a detriment. It will cost them early in the season before they start getting their feet under them, which is why I have them in the wild card. Now, I don't have Colorado making the playoffs. I don't. And Matt's already touched upon it, right? When you have all those names that are up in the air, that you don't know what's going to happen, even when it comes to mid-November or whatever else, you don't know what's happening with Lehkonen. Landeskog's probably gone. forever. Nobody knows what's happening with Nichushkin, excuse me. You have zero money to do anything. What's going to happen to this team? I'll tell you what's going to happen to this team. They're going to be playing golf while everybody else is still playing hockey.
We're talking about the Maple Leafs, George.
I will say one thing quickly to be on George's side slightly. I still think he's a little psychotic here, but a lot of the teams that have like those star power guys that you're like, how do they miss the playoffs? They still usually have a pretty strong goaltender to kind of put the team on their back if they really need to. I think we all are in agreement that Alexander Georgiev is a scary 1A goaltender, and they don't even have a 1B on the roster right now. So it's not like
Don't say we all without polling the group, Matt.
Listen, Matt.
I have plenty of confidence in Georgiev.
He has plenty of confidence in Georgiev because Georgiev comes at the price that he feels every goalie should be paid, under $3.5 million. That's
true.
The only confidence he has in Georgiev, because listen, he was shaky as a backup at best in New York. He was shaky as a backup everywhere else. And then all of a sudden Colorado came and knocking and he's the 1A. Okay, great. What has he won, or what has he helped Colorado win?
Before I
regular season games.
Before I pump your tires too hard, George, I need you to say in words, like repeat after me. Phrase.
Clip it right here. This one's going on the Instagram.
You need to tell me that prime Nathan McKinnon and prime Cale Makar on the same team cannot make the playoffs, because I just think that is an impossible thing.
They're not going to make the playoffs. And I'll tell you why. They're going to rely too heavily on the top line offensively and the top line defensively. Once you start getting guys 25 to 30 minutes TOI, come game 70, they're going to be wiped. What makes you think in that final push for the playoffs, in those final 12 games where it becomes extremely instrumental, that they're going to have anything left in the gas tank? I don't care how young you are. I don't care what you're doing. You're playing in a super physical league, the best league in the world. Everybody's gunning for you because nobody likes you anyways. And you're going to be the top two out there consistently.
But you look at 2017 to 2019 Edmonton with McDavid and Draisaitl playing 26, 27 minutes a night. And that was before they had the likes of Zach Hyman and that decor that they had last year with Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard playing so well. And they still found a way to make the playoffs with two of the best players in the league. I just think we haven't even talked about Mikko Rantanen on this team. I love the hot take. I think it's one of those where we look back at it and we're like, okay, I can see where you're coming from. But, when they're in the playoffs again this year, we're going to look back on it and be like, all right, what are we doing here? It's Colorado. Come on.
Great. Look, if things shake out for the positive for Colorado, then great. My decision of keeping them out of the playoffs is based off of goaltending and a lack of knowledge of what is actually happening with that roster. Is it going to be a full roster or not? And they don't have the money to kind of go out and say, okay, well, we're not going to have this player, so we're going to go out and supplement and get some players out there. What are they going to be doing?
Clip it, put it on the Instagram, put it on the TikTok, put it on the Twitter. Let's see what the Colorado fans have to say. George Bannister does not think Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar and Mikko Rantanen and company can get it done this year. We'll see. George, it's a well thought out idea. But again, it goes right. Somebody's got to miss the playoffs. Somebody misses the playoffs. Whether that's Colorado, as George loosely has thought about and has put down, whether that's Utah, whether that's Minnesota, whether that's Winnipeg, that was my hot take, I guess. Somebody's got to miss the playoffs. So we'll wait and we'll see. Before we get to our parlay party to close things out, we'll cover some big NHL news that has gone down. Quickly touch on Lucas Raymond, and I don't want to spend too much time here because we have an entire episode coming up on the Atlantic Division, but congratulations to him and the Detroit Red Wings. The Iser plan still in effect, 8 years on $8.075 million, which comes as a head scratcher as this one was released just a couple hours after the next name that's going to be said, and the biggest of the day. Sidney Crosby re-signs 2 years at $8.7 million. And the information of our lead editor on the podcast, Nick Kojan, sends the text that as this contract is signed, after it concludes, Crosby will have 19 straight seasons at an $8.7 million AAV for number 87, which is just crazy when you think about some of the players that are getting signed for the exact same number that maybe a top, well, no, I won't even say maybe, definitely a top 5 all-time hockey player, maybe top 3, maybe one of, if not the greatest hockey players of all time in Sidney Crosby, a leadership guy, a proven captain that could have gone out and got Draisaitl money for 2 years for all the Penguins care with the way their franchise is going. But guys, thoughts on the Crosby signing? Comes back for 2 more years and still takes a hometown discount as his career is on the back end here, nearing age 40.
It was no surprise to me. Crosby obviously wants to end his career in Pittsburgh, but at the same time, if you're looking at the numbers and everything else, it comes as no surprise. And those who follow Liverpool and the Boston Red Sox can say the same thing. Fenway Sports Group is cheap as hell. So for them to say, hey, you wear 87, you want to get paid 8.7 again, blah, 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 blah. And Crosby saying, yeah, sure, it's my final 2 years probably anyway of my career. Let's just do it. It comes as no surprise to me. Right. And you're absolutely right, Casey. He could have signed for a lot more money, but at the end of the day, he loves Pittsburgh. He wants to end his career there. Kudos for him for that. And kudos for, I guess, Fenway Sports Group of being that cheap and hammering him down to 8.7.
And you look at another legend in a different sport who did a similar thing with Tom Brady towards the end of his career with the Patriots and with the Buccaneers. It helps the rest of the team be better, right? You know, every year you have Sidney Crosby, you're not going to be in the bottom of the league. So he's doing everything he can to allow Kyle Dubas to build around him as much as possible before they go into a full absolute dumpster fire, which I think in the next, he's got 2 more years on this deal. So I think in 3 years from now, that's where they're going to be. But, if Crosby wants to play till he's 45, he probably can. I think some people are just built differently. And I think Sidney Crosby is one of those guys where age has not mattered whatsoever. He's been a top 10 player in the league every single year that he's been a part of the league. So for me, I love the signing. I'm a huge Crosby fan, not even a Penguins fan, but I think just Sidney Crosby is a guy who is so good for the league as a whole.
It just makes the $10 million Erik Karlsson signing seem all that more silly for Kyle Dubas, in my opinion, when you've got these greats in the big 3 there all signed for less money than a guy who had one big year as a San Jose Shark that Matt was going crazy for, and then gets dealt off and take the money and run, baby. Karlsson is just Karlsson might single-handedly be the reason that this team does not make playoffs for the near and long term and last year all combined. But shouts to Crosby for taking the pay cut. I can't believe he did it. I really thought he'd come in worth quite a bit more for this team that likely is not going to make the playoffs this year or next or any 5 to 10 in front of that.
Can I say one thing about Erik Karlsson? We need to show you some of those Ottawa Senators highlights that he had that got him that big contract in San Jose, because he was one of, if not the best defenseman in the league for a nice 3 to 4 year stretch in Ottawa there.
I'm not saying he doesn't deserve the contract. I'm saying it was a terrible trade at this point in his career. He had a heck of a year in San Jose. Pittsburgh was in absolutely no situation to bring on that money when they were already going to be in cap trouble and have to, keep the big guys around and try to stay relevant. A $10 million defenseman that doesn't play defense is not where that's at.
Oh, but yeah, I 100% agree with you in terms of, I think Karlsson definitely should have been dealt at that time, but Pittsburgh was absolutely not the right team to go do it.
San Jose just looks genius on that deal. They made out like bandits. The next piece of news hits very close to home for two of the three of us. In addition onto episode 6, if you want to go back and hear the lead up to this conversation where George and I sat down and talked in depth about all of the drama around the NCAA and the NIL money and the potential of CHL players coming to the NCAA. This week, Braxton Whitehead of the CHL verbally committed to Arizona State to become the first CHL player committed to an NCAA roster. Now, that's just a verbal commitment, so it on paper does not mean anything. It does not mean that he's officially an NCAA player, but he is the first player out of the CHL to outright commit to being an NCAA player in the future. Likely it's going to happen. He's committed for next season. So not this upcoming season that starts this month, the following season in 25-26. And of course, he goes to Arizona State, just the villains of the NCAA. And I'll stop there. But man, George, this is revolutionary for the NCAA and potentially completely destructive for certain teams in college hockey.
I would say it's destructive more than anything, Casey. I mean, if that is allowed to stand and go through and he inks the deal with Arizona State, that's going to put the entirety of the 64 teams in men's NCAA Division I college hockey into a bedlam, because it's just going to be a feeding frenzy. And then it's going to turn into something worse than football, than NCAA college football, as far as like who's got the money, who's going to be hiring general managers on their teams to, bring in these big talents. Casey, we both work ECAC games. We were talking about this off the air with Matt, and we we're saying, maybe outside of the Ivies, all the rest of those schools are going to be in trouble when it comes to having a legitimate program. Maybe Quinnipiac, maybe with all of its success. I don't know how much money is coming in, but not just that. You look at Hockey East as well, and all the other we've talked about it at length. NCHC, Big Ten should be okay, right? But Hockey East, if you take away Boston College, Boston University, probably Providence College, because Steve Napolillo will probably be all in on that as the athletic director over there. UMass is already in. Who else can be in Hockey East? Is Maine going to jump in? Northeastern, New Hampshire, UMass Lowell, Merrimack, Vermont. You're looking at conferences that by and large could disintegrate and or combine to become a separate conference with 2 or 3 bigger conferences on the map. And that's just no good for anybody involved. It's not good for the athletes. It's not good for the institutions. And frankly, it's not good for the NCAA because none of that money is going into Charlie Baker's pocket or anybody over there. It's going to be a wild ride to see whether or not that officially stands.
I think as an NCAA individual as a whole and not a small market hockey guy, some of the opportunities that I see are more for the sport itself within the United States. I think the ability for United States junior players to go play in such a competitive league in the CHL and get a chance to come back and play in the United States, I think elevates the game of college hockey as a whole. I think we're due for an expansion at that point. I think it creates this sort of mid-major college hockey that George was kind of mentioning with conference realignment potentially. I think there's pros and cons to that as well. But, the past 20 to 30 years, we've seen the game grow outside of Canada. I think this just brings the opportunity as well to continue to expand the game within the United States. And, Gary Bettman said he wants to expand beyond 32. And I think the more hockey players that are being developed in the U.S., the more markets that are going to be, hockey beds, right? You think about Arizona potentially getting a team back. You look at like Atlanta, for an example. You look at Houston's been in the talks for a team.
Hartford.
Especially right in my backyard at the XL Center, which I'm actually staying right across from right now. So I think, there are definitely some cons to this as well. But I think for the overall sport of hockey, this does bring an opportunity that might be beneficial for the United States as an entire country. If we look at the global scale of hockey in the States.
It's so interesting, the different perceptions all around. George and I could not be more anti everything the NCAA has done in the past 12 months. Matt, you come from the University of Minnesota, big time, big dog hockey. You're now in Boston and a proud season ticket holder of all the Boston schools out there, and you get to watch big time, big dog hockey. And Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts, they were talking about this exact topic, and he's talking about how awesome it is that these CHL kids are going to come in and revolutionize some of these programs, and it couldn't be more differing perceptions. And Matt, I love what you talk about with the growth of the game, because it's exactly a piece of that where you have big schools that are in it's a good thing. It sucks if you're in the position of me and George, where we root for the small schools that are going to have no chance in the future. But schools like North Carolina, the ACC schools that are so prominent down there, NC State, like they had the unbelievable sold out outdoor game right after the Stadium Series was down there. All the SEC schools that have major programs that are building big time rinks and selling them out. Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, some of those big rivalries that are starting to form without Division I teams. That's all going to come. But then you look at, like, George, going back to the small schools, the Atlantic teams, the ECAC, Union, RPI, Clarkson, St. Lawrence. I was talking to someone up here earlier this week, and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble if it goes to the wrong market, but I heard somewhere someone was telling me Clarkson and St. Lawrence in the next 5 to 10 years, one of the two schools could be gone. With lack of enrollment right now, they're having trouble getting kids. It's a nationwide problem with university enrollments being down. But when you look at those two schools where hockey is your primary funder for athletics, this could, George, we talked about it in episode 6, but this could completely decimate some of these, like, and the NCAA gets money out of it. Woohoo, good job, NCAA. This could fold universities as a whole. Clarkson could be off the map. Clarkson hockey is what they've got going. 5 years from now, we might not be talking about some of these school unions. Is a team that can't afford more than 3 full ride contracts. How are they going to be able to hold in there? And probably time to move on to the parlay party here, as the steam's going to start blowing out my ears. But it's very interesting, the differing thoughts where you have like very notable sources like Elliot Friedman talking about how it's a great thing, and a lot of big time, very wise people in the industry are extremely pro the move. And then you've got the small school markets that it's going to really make a big change, where they're going to have a tough time, and they're going to really have to go hard on recruiting or fundraising and certain structures to be able to stay relevant.
Yeah, it's just to end here, you mentioned Atlantic hockey, everybody in that conference, right? Everybody in that conference. You have schools, some schools, RIT, by and large, a Division III athletic program, except for hockey. Bentley, Division II, except for hockey. Air Force is I think D1 football, D1 hockey, but everything else is like, what are they going to be doing? It's, to your point, Casey, we're looking at it as, for the sport of hockey itself, but also for the institutions. What's going to happen to, to a Clarkson, to a St. Lawrence? What's going to happen, to a Robert Morris? they're up and coming in the Atlantic. What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to AIC if they don't have that Division I money coming in? That's the other side of it.
We'll move on and have some fun to finish it off. The Parlay Party, the betting segment of the Fifth Liners podcast. Each of us with our favorite 3 picks from the Central Division. I'll kick us off here. I've got 4 picks. One of them sniffed my eye, but I'm not putting it in there because I wasn't confident enough. And I don't like taking unders because overs are just too much more fun. My honorable mention goes to Wyatt Johnston's line of 79.5 points. I think the under is a pretty good go there. Last year, he was low 60s. I just don't think Dallas gives enough to one player in their offense to be able to have a breakout player go plus 20 points from where he was. I think you look at Robertson in Dallas's offense. He was a guy that was unbelievably on top of the world and a point per game player, and came back to earth with the way they started playing this year, which was their most successful season, arguably. Rupi Hintz was a way above point per player that was closer to half a point per player this season. I think that the under for Wyatt Johnston is very interesting with the line that they have, but instead my player prop goes to the Minnesota Wild. I also almost went fully Dallas Stars. If I would have taken that one, I had to, spread some love around the division. I'm going to the Minnesota Wild and the team that intrigues me the most out of this Central Division, because as we mentioned, all of us are kind of down on Minnesota. George put them in the wild card picture. The other 2 of us have them out. I think it all revolves around Kirill Kaprizov and whether or not he can be the astonishing talent that he is. His line is at 99.5 points. So whether or not he can crack 100, I've got him doing it. I'm taking the over at minus 115 this year. He did it easily 2 years ago. Last season had some injuries, but he had in the high 80s playing in 75 games. It was 94 points in 75 games. If he gets the full 82 this year and can keep Zuccarello around him, that was another big factor that took points away. Need Zuccarello to stay healthy. I'm taking the over there. And then my other 2 revolve around the Dallas Stars and their success. Like I said, I think they're a high 108 to 113 point team this year. They have their total points line set at 103.5. That's an easy over for me. That would be my absolute lock if I can throw one down. And I'm taking the Dallas Stars at plus 240 to win the division.
Casey, a lot of those picks were on my homework, so I had to go and reshuffle mine. It's 2 weeks in a row now that you're copying off the kid in the back of the classroom. But
just get it done faster, buddy. I had my picks in there hours before, and you're coming in last minute trying to, cheat off the smart kid over here. I guess if we go from last year, it's the kid that was spending too much time out on the playground got put in detention or something. So the teacher's pet now looks silly. Is the bottom of the barrel, the cream rise to the crop, baby.
Ditzel did his homework this time, but thankfully there are plenty of opportunities on DraftKings to just earn free money, what I'd like to call it here. And I've got 3 that I really like. You mentioned the Minnesota Wild and the players that are going to have to step up for them. One that I'm a little down on this year is Brock Faber. I think, got paid and obviously deserves so for some of the defensive opportunities that he gives for Minnesota. I think with Jared Spurgeon coming back, I genuinely do think they're going to give Spurgeon the keys back to that power play. And Brock Faber is not going to have to play 25, 26 minutes a night. His current line is 53.5 points. And I think that's just really high for a defenseman, right? If he gets to 10 goals, which is pretty high for a defenseman in general, does he get to 44 assists? It's almost an assist every other game. I think with Spurgeon in the picture, I just have the under there at minus 115. My second one is, and this is my mortal lock as well, Nashville's point total right now. You look at a team last year who definitely went on a run after the whole Sphere incident, but they were a 99-point team last year. Every single person that we've talked to in the hockey industry thinks Nashville got better this year, and their over-under is 98.5. I think they're easily a better team than last year, and all they have to do is match their point total from last year to hit that over at -115. And then the third one, which is a little bit of a wild card, according to the books, but for the three of us, we all have it happening at +205. The St. Louis Blues making the playoffs. We're all very high on St. Louis, me as well. I moved them up to my number 2 in the division even. And I think if they just get a little bit of luck from Binnington and Hofer, they were 6 points out of it last year. I think they can make the jump and be one of those teams in the Central that gets in, even as a wild card. But at +205, the value there is just great.
I can't believe I missed on Nashville there. I didn't even see that line because when I was going through over under points, Dallas was one of the first that popped up, and it's crazy with how we've talked about the Central. It is crazy to think that the top 2 and 3 teams are that low where every one of them you can almost take the over. George, you've got one of the most interesting picks for the team over under total here.
You think so? I have the Minnesota Wild at over 93.5. I don't think at -115. I don't think that's, I have them as one of my wild card teams. So I think that's what it's going to take for them to establish themselves as one of those wild card teams. They're going to need to get over 93.5, and I think they could do it. My other 2 are my divisional winner, the Nashville Predators at +380. I think that's a pretty good deal right there if you throw down some money. And then finally, sticking with Nashville, one of their newer additions, Jonathan Marchessault at over 30.5 goals at -115. I think he could do it. Obviously, he produces anyway, and then having the opportunity to be surrounded by other players like a Nyquist, like a Stamkos, like an O'Reilly that could either A, feed him the puck, or B, take the attention away from him. That's simple.
Parlay Party brought to you by the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast, and our second ever, as we'll continue to fire through them here. Guys, how on top of it is the Fifth Liners Podcast right now? We are right on pace with Spittin' Chicklets, but 1 week ahead of time. We kicked it off with the Metropolitan Division. 1 week after Spittin' Chicklets drops their Metro preview. Last week, we hit it with the Pacific Division. This week, Chicklets is going Pacific Division. We are just out there taking their thunder from them. Couldn't be more proud. 10 episodes down, and we are just catching stride right now inside 1 month until the start of the season. Maddie, work, business, and everything that does not sound fun. What's going on the rest of the week for you?
Work, business, and things that don't sound very fun. You just mentioned it right there. I'll be in Hartford for the rest of the week, and then catching up on my other client jobs for the rest of the weekend. So just a busy time in September for the auditors of the world, but looking forward to some hockey here. I had to carve some time out to chat hockey with some of the best guys in the industry, the ones that are a little bit ahead. I'm pretty sure that Biz and Whit are listening in to make sure what we're talking about so that they can go and get their takes in based on what they're hearing from us. So hit the nail on the head there.
The character image just could not continue to shape even harder around Matt's persona as the absolute nerd on this podcast. The kid just works all the time, kisses butts to the teachers, and has his nose in the books right now. Maddie, unfortunately, we're rooting for you. Hopefully someday you can get some coordination and come up with the jocks like me and George. George, what about you? What's going on? You've been killing it on the field hockey front. Some electricity going through the Twitter waves.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. I no surprise, more field hockey. I actually, you retweeted my big personal news. Eastern Hockey League, the junior league I'm broadcasting for, opening weekend this coming Friday. So, got to get my pipes ready for Friday, Saturday, first 2 games of the year, and really looking forward to it.
How about snaps to George as well? The second big hiring of the season. Colin headed out to be the voice of the Tahoe Night Monsters, as he'll be heading out about a week from now. He's out in India that's why he's not on right now, as he's enjoying his last time off before joining big corporate America. Matt, he's right with you there. George, we're proud of you there. And another big hockey announcement that was part of that is you'll be the voice of Providence hockey coming up this coming season as well.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I cannot wait. When I got the call, sat down with the wife, and I'm like, so we're doing this, right? Because this is what the path was supposed to be, or what the path has been wanted to be. And she's like, yeah, we're doing this. So we're doing it, baby.
We have not had the chance to hear of Colin's travel horrors. I'll leave that for the next time we get him on. After the last episode that we recorded, he told us one of just the most mind-boggling travel stories I've ever heard. Well, and I want to save that one for him. I might be right up there with him. So I'm the assistant coach of the Clarkson golf team. For those who don't know, this week was a nightmare for the Clarkson athletics travel. So all Clarkson teams are on the road, all the fall sports. We were uninvited to the Middlebury Invitational that we'd previously been in because they cut the number of teams. One team late withdrew about 2 weeks ago. They invited us in, got the hotels situated, finally got into the tournament, whatever. Well, we're not on the travel schedule. All the other school vans and vehicles have been rented out. So we book through Enterprise with the school, make our Enterprise reservation. About 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from a random 315 number. Answer it. Like, hello, this is Casey. Sorry, did you just make a booking with Enterprise? Yes, sir. Well, we don't have any cars. We're fully booked out. Well, this goes back to like the Seinfeld skit for those who haven't looked up this.
Yeah, I love that episode.
What's the point of the booking if you're going to take the booking and you don't have the cars? The whole point of the reservation is that the car is reserved. Well,
Chick-fil-A is out of chicken.
Happened. Like word for word, this is my conversation on the phone with the guy. Like, all right, well, we'll figure it out. So Clarkson gives us the van that we've driven for 3 years. 3 years ago, this van broke down on the side of I-90. I'm driving through the Keene Valley Mountain Pass in Lake Placid. All of a sudden, this thing's running around 3,000 RPMs, downshifts to 1,000, crooks it up red lines at 6,000. I'm like, oh God, there's no cell service for 2 hours on either side. Then it goes back down, and it just keeps downshifting and redlining back and forth. All of a sudden, this damn thing starts shaking, and it sounds like a helicopter's taking off. It's got like, it sounds like there's screws loose, like the entire freaking dashboard is about to fall off. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So we pull over when we get to the top, and I got a whole team of engineers behind me. I'm like, all right, my car guy's like, I'm a communications major. I don't even know what the heck like the check engine light means half the time. I'm like, someone go figure out if the car is gonna like explode right now. My captain gets out, kicks the front wheel, and goes, well, and I thought it was shaking because we had a flat or something. He goes, yeah, it's not flat, but it might fall off. The wheel bearing on the car is completely going. So somehow we make it to Middlebury. We're driving back. All of a sudden, we're stopped at a crosswalk, letting some students go. Thing revs to 5,000 out of nowhere at 0 miles an hour. Check engine light comes on. So they send a bus out to bring the team home. Someone's got to bring the van back to campus. That's me. I'm just driving, holding on, white knuckling it for dear life the whole time as the damn thing's shaking for dear life. Made it back in one piece, so the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast continues. But I was going to text Maddie and say, hey, if you don't hear from me, make sure that the show goes on for at least 14 episodes so that we can break that mark of 13. But Colin's going to have me beat by 10 miles when he comes back on. I think it'll be another couple weeks before he gets back from his trip and gets all settled in. But George, that was an even crazier story that he told us.
Colin's story was crazy, but that's pretty wild. That is wild that they're like, hey, you see this rickety van? Go travel to Middlebury.
It was our only option. We had the Enterprise had no cars. All the buses are at different locations. So fortunately, the bus was able to come get the guys and lighten the load for the trip home. But oh boy, yeah, that was quite the road trip, and if that's not the definition of college athletics. And on top of it, I got pulled over in. And I forgot to mention the brakes on the van are going. So we're driving through Ticonderoga. It's just this crazy downhill and a stop sign with a right turn. We're driving down the hill, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, everyone, behave!" Because there's a cop sitting here at the intersection. Hit the brakes, everything starts rumbling. Get to the stoplight. This is right after dinner, so it's pitch black out. Take the right, lights come on immediately. I'm like, mother, you got to be kidding me. Guy comes up. Cop has the worst voice crack in history. It's like it must have been a training cop because he's got a cop with him. And he goes, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No." "Well, you completely rolled through that stop sign. You didn't stop, and if you would have, you were 5 feet in front of the line. You're supposed to stop behind the line." Like he's acting like it's just the biggest traffic violation he's ever seen. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the monkeys in the background of my D3 golf team are just hooting and hollering, like just peeing themselves laughing that coach just got pulled over. Made it out without a ticket. My record with the police stays unscathed, 7-0. But that might have been one of the most eventful weekends of my career, and it had nothing to do with hockey. Anyone got anything to top that before we close it off here?
No, you win, man.
To take the cake this week. At least you knew he didn't pull you over for speed. I don't think that thing was getting above 55 on. He might have pulled you over for being too slow on I-90. I think people on the thruway are pretty upset when you're not driving 80 on it. So
that's not just in Massachusetts. That's good to know. That's good to know.
That's right. Massachusetts would have had a field day with me driving like 45 on the side. Fortunately, through the mountain passes, there's nowhere to pass, so everybody's stuck behind me. If it would have gone too wrong, I had at least 100 cars waiting. Oh, boy. Boys, 10 episodes down. We have hit the decade mark and expect to hit the century, hopefully by next Stanley Cup. It's the highlight of my week when we get to sit down here next week. Coming up, the Atlantic Division, and from the off-recording talks we've already had, this one could get heated. Everywhere from Ottawa Senators making the playoffs to Ottawa Senators not making the playoffs, Brady Tkachuk being the greatest captain of all time, to Matt being an absolute imbecile on his hockey takes, whether or not the Montreal Canadiens are there, the Detroit Red Wings and the Yzerplan, who's getting fired after this season, all of that to come. Stay tuned, but as always, a great thank you to all of our viewers that are still with us and have stuck around here. We hit a record high views on last week's episode. Hopefully we can continue that forward here. And guys, looking forward to it. For those watching and listening, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. A big help to continuing the improvement of the show as we go forward. This has been another episode of the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Later.